Scanosowego, so that's Logan Key, and I believe this is the final video for men's programming with Brisk. So just as a quick recap, some of the things that I had discussed in previous videos. So we talked about masculinity, and in particular, separating Indigenous masculinity versus mainstream masculinity. Talked about the basis of the Haudenosaunee civilization and its relationship to men, and our understanding from a civilization, from a cultural standpoint, how that relates to us. We talked about relationships. We talked about interactions. Talked about conflict resolution. We talked about unhealthy methods of conflict resolution. We talked about the history of how we got to be where we came from, where it's gotten us in terms of the interventional colonization and things like that, and how we can strive to recapture that sense of maleness, masculinity, from an Indigenous perspective, while being surrounded by this largely different society around us. Talked about relationship types. So there's a lot of information, and some of it could be heavy. Hopefully, some of it was eye-opening. Food for thought. Gives you something to think about. Open up new avenues that you might want to pursue in terms of your own healing, in terms of the direction that you may want to take your life into, those kinds of things. So with that, whenever I do a series of presentations or groups, towards the end, and in this circumstance it is the end, or at least the end for now, the finishing of this, one of the things that I want to be clear about is that because some of this information can be very heavy, and if it's brand new for you, it can have a major impact. And because we're doing this by video, instead of me being the facilitator there in front of you, which would allow interaction, the impact can be different. It can be, it can have facets to it that wouldn't normally be there without a facilitator, a co-facilitator, and the supports of the agency that you're accessing this through. So with that, what I like to finish off with is self-care. Why that's important is because, well, there's a lot of reasons why it's important, but the main general reason is looking after yourself so that you can continue on. And when I say continue on, what I mean is continue to move forward. That can be difficult, especially when new information that may have major changes in the way that you think. Which, I'm hoping some of this information does, and in a positive way. So, the concept of self-care. So a little bit of history around self-care. As I have come to understand it, as I may have mentioned before, I believe I've been in this profession of counseling, therapeutics, client support for 28 years, going on 29 years. When I started, when I was brand new, the concept of self-care was just beginning to be formalized. So organizations hadn't really pulled that concept, pulled that idea of self-care uh, in a formalized way into programming, into policies and procedures and things like that. Uh, my first encounter with the term self-care was just an acknowledgement from upper management that the workers need to take care of themselves so that they can do their jobs. I wasn't on board with that. The reason why I wasn't on board with that, I wasn't saying nay to the concept of self-care. What I was saying nay to was the idea that the point of self-care is so that you can continue to work. So they want you to take care of yourself so that you maintain the work and the output that you're producing for them. There's a whole bunch of connotations around it in terms of well, I won't go into that because there's a lot of political ramifications. There's a lot of $50 words that I learned in university that's all about. Essentially, what it is, it's not so much that in the initial stages it wasn't voiced that they cared about the employees because they want the employees to do well. What it sounded like was they were saying, we want to make sure that you're still functional so that we still benefit from your being here. I'm not saying that was the intent, but the wording, it did come across that way. The concept of self-care has evolved in the way that it's implemented in the workplace and in the workforce. And I think it's also been promoted more away from the job, not simply as a function of being a productive worker, but a function of being as balanced as possible, as well adjusted as possible, a citizen within your civilization, within our civilization, whether that's related to work, family, relationships, sporting teams, organizations, whatever it is, groups, the concept of taking care of oneself. Right? So separate, instead of just saying self-care, taking care of oneself. And it's multifaceted. So if we go back to that basic concept of the human being from an indigenous perspective, and it can be pictured differently. So the typical indigenous picture is this circle in 4 quadrants: the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. As a Haudenosaunee, we tend not to use circles. But the concept that's sort of formulated in my mind around those 4 aspects was there's a bit of a hierarchy. So at the base level is your physical being. This houses your mind, this houses your spirit. It helps you function in the world. So at the base, physical. And then the next layer up, spiritual, or sorry, emotional. Because with emotion, it's a basic tool that we have. I've mentioned that earlier, that emotions are a basic tool. They're signals. They let us know that whether we like something or dislike something. It's kind of an early warning system that those things are at play and they're going to have an effect on us. If we don't have an emotional reaction to something, then it's not that meaningful to us, and it won't have that much of an impact. And then the mental, that is the thinking process. When I talked about Benny Cleo, the big mind, and the way that I I've been taught to understand them through it. The way your mind thinks, the way it learns, the way it processes, the way it comes to decisions, all of that involved. And then when we talk about the spirit, it's all of those things combined. They have to be together for the spirit to be functional, right? That's my understanding of when we talk about human being. That's our concept of it. So when we say multifaceted self-care, taking care of oneself, it's taking care of essentially those three aspects. And taking care of those three aspects feeds the spirit. So it might be a bit more complicated to explain it that way. But if your understanding is the four quadrants, so the circle with the four quadrants, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Because that is actually an easier, simpler way to conceptualize the human being in that. And if that works for you, that fits, fine. Right? We can work with either one. But essentially, it's feeding those parts, taking care of those parts. So different ways that self-care is approached. Different ways that it's approached, different ways that it's conceptualized. And I can speak from my own experience. When I first heard the term self-care, quite a number of the people that were talking to me about this, or I was listening to, now this is in my early 20s, they tended to gravitate towards things like the spa, right? And getting massages. Calluses off the feet, getting nails done, getting hair done, things like that. So my first encounter with an understanding of self-care was pampering. Paying someone to take care of these things for you. And that sort of carried the torch for me, for a number of years, until I moved to another position, as a counselor. And then it expanded from there, because that self-care, that pampering thing, didn't necessarily have to be hiring someone else or going somewhere. You could do those things for yourself. And at the time, there were products coming on the market, self-massagers, shiatsu massagers, things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is self-care, because it's looking after you. It's looking after yourself. It's looking after yourself, caring for yourself from one aspect, from one perspective of physicality. So when I talk about physical self-care, it has a lot of different perspectives. That pampering thing is one perspective. Another perspective is looking after your body, in terms of what you put into it, what you feed it. So there's generalities in there, an understanding of healthy food, and you can take that to whatever degree that you want. I know that right now one of the buzzwords in healthy food is the keto diet, ketosis, the process of how your body manages food and stores fat and things like that. And it can be fairly complicated and involved. And if that's your cup of tea, then you can run with that. For a lot of people, that might be a bit much, but a general understanding of what's healthy food, what's good for you, but also an understanding of what's not good for you. In this sense, and this is going to be a theme that runs through all of self-care, is an understanding of balance. So I've mentioned it before, this concept of, instead of looking at things as these points, think of them more as a pendulum, an equilibrium, what do you call that, a gauge. So one extreme, center. And generally the concept is center is balanced. So if you had this little pendulum, the needle up and the weight down here, every time that you tipped the bottom part of the pendulum, the needle goes back and forth, but eventually it's going to come back to center. In a very general sense, that is equilibrium, that is balance. But in human existence, we are individuals. Now, I've talked about that previously in terms of our outlook on the world. The difference here in understanding this is because looking at it from the perspective of differences amongst individuals, even differences amongst people who were raised together, versus differences of people from different civilizations and different cultures and things like that. Essentially what that means is every person is an individual, and there are unique things about each individual. So based on things that you like, the things that your body responds to, the things that you respond to emotionally and mentally and spiritually, that will skew that sense of where balance is. So when I say skew, what I mean is, if we take that concept of the continuum, so at this end is 0, at this end is 100, and if we were to label this physical activity, so without looking at the individual stuff. So 0 is there's no physical activity. 100 is Olympic athlete level. And most people are somewhere on the middle, maybe a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher on that. And depending on how you evaluate that, and I have some problems with how generally that evaluation goes. Your level of physical activity, your level of ability will be labeled as not enough, too much, just right, and things like that. But accounting for individualism, that center balance being labeled as balanced, right? Center balance, balanced. Because every individual is different. For some people, their comfort level and their joy is a lot of activity. So every weekend, every season, they're playing some sport. Summertime, they're playing softball, slow pitch, 3-pitch. Come fall time, they're looking into hockey. Springtime, starting into things like lacrosse. Summertime, lacrosse. But they like a lot of physical activity. Maybe they work out at home. So for them, instead of balance being here, balance is actually over here. Now, mind you, if their workout schedule is something like I wake up in the morning and I do yoga and I do stretches. At lunch hour, I have a very light meal and go for a walk, and then right after work I go to the gym, and then in the evening it's more yoga and stretches, and that's a daily thing. That might be mentally and emotionally fulfilling, but scientific evidence shows that if you can overtrain yourself, and instead of benefiting, you start to have decline. So is that balanced? If you're just focused on the mental and emotional, that might feel like, yes, that's great, but physically, you're coming over here. So the balance has to be between all of those 4 quadrants. You want a perfect circle. No one ever achieves a perfect circle, but you want to be as close to that perfect as possible. But if you're focused on one of the quadrants or two of the quadrants and you're neglecting the other quadrants, you're pulling yourself out of balance. So it has to have that balanced perspective. And for other people, they're not physically inclined. That doesn't mean that they don't do things physically. So their sense of balance is over here a little more. So instead of that perfect equilibrium, it's over here. But for that individual, that feels perfect. Sometimes they're a little less, sometimes they're a little more, but that feels perfect. Generally, what I'm trying to say there is, when we're talking about balance in self-care, it's not comparing your sense of balance to everybody else. It's finding your sense of balance and doing what you can to maintain that. Right? Yeah. So moving on. Self-care has so many different aspects to it. And one of the things that comes to mind is rest. So you need rest. And so, going back to the workout schedule thing. Generally speaking, different experts will say different things, but generally, what they recommend is having some sort of cardio activity, 3 to 4 times a week, and some sort of resistance workout activity 2 to 3 times a week. Spacing them out. In a general sense, that's balance. And if we're looking at 7 days a week and we're trying to establish a schedule, there's rest periods. That's why it's 2 to 3 days a week of weights, 3 to 4 days a week of cardio. And they also will recommend a rest day. One day where you're not doing any weights, you're not doing any cardio, you're just not doing heavy physical activity. The reason being is that you require rest. From the Indigenous perspective, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, you need that rest in all those quadrants. And again, think of it in terms of theme. Anything that I talk about here, it has to have it in all 4 of those quadrants. So, mental rest, emotional rest, and spiritual rest. If you run into this idea that I constantly have to be on top of development, maintenance of myself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, you will run into fatigue, physical fatigue, mental fatigue, emotional fatigue, spiritual fatigue. You will need the rest. Whenever you find yourself in this position where you're thinking about something and you're running in circles and you start to get this tunnel vision, that's usually a sign that you need some rest. Move off of thinking about that. Same thing with emotions. You have strong reactions. Like I said, emotions are a tool, but there also has to be mental awareness of that tool, because if you're constantly allowing yourself to be mentally triggered by things, and it doesn't even have to be a big trigger. It doesn't have to be a big emotional outburst. It can be small, but if it happens on a regular basis and it keeps happening, you can get emotional fatigue. One of the things that I've really come to understand when it comes to maintaining balance between in particular, the emotions and the mind, is this little formula. You have to have these two balanced, a balance between the two of those quadrants, because if you allow yourself to go on emotion without your mind guiding it. You run into things like knee-jerk reactions. You start to, as I say, go with your heart. To be very blunt, the heart is stupid. Even the heart, the emotions are stupid because they're a tool, and then what they do is they react. Something happens that you have encountered before, so you already know whether you like it or you don't like it. And when that comes up, you have an emotional reaction. It's automatic. I mean, there is evidence that you choose your emotions, but that comes before. In the moment, it's an automatic trigger. And if you're basing your reaction on the emotion, you haven't had a thinking process. Conversely, if you let your mind always steer the ship without any regard to the emotional impacts of things, essentially you become very technical and you become very robotic in your responses. The heart is the fuel for your reaction. Your brain is the guide for the reaction. They must work together. And physically, it's your body who feeds the information that comes in that tells you how you need to react and what you need to think about. And those three working together build your spirit. That tells you that this is a good thing or a not good thing, or that this is expansive. An understanding of spirituality. Again, multifaceted, comes from many different perspectives. Generally speaking, a lot of people, when they talk about spirituality, it's a comparison to religion. So religion is a set of guidelines about how you are to be in connection with teachings from a great spirit. Whether that you call that the creator, call it God, whatever term that you have, or a multitude of gods, if that's your religious belief. So it's always in connection to something other and bigger. And if you're a bit religiously inclined, that can be true for you. But spirituality isn't just that. Because if you maintain a spirituality without fitting it into any religious connotation or religious framework, and there are people who will make an argument that that's not possible. I particularly I beg to differ. You can have a spiritual understanding without necessarily attaching it to a set of religious rules and frameworks and things like that. Because in that sense, it's about connecting to the things that you have deemed important. There are tons of examples of that. There are people who consider themselves naturists, so they follow nature, they believe in nature, they try to care for nature, and they believe that there's a spiritual connection to being a naturist. There are people who believe in spirit guides, and that is their spiritual connection, and that's all fine. If that's what works for you, as long as it's grounded in reality. There's a tangible world that we're in, and we do have to exist in. So being mindful of balance between there. The spirituality that I think doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is very important and can exist in conjunction with all the other concepts of spirituality, is a connection to an inner self. So I know in the Longhouse we talk about the fire, the metaphoric fire, your drive, your determination, your spirit. And because we have this physical existence, sometimes we lose track of the connection to our own spirit. So, in a spiritual sense, reconnecting or maintaining our connection to our own sense of who we are. Remember, in peace, power, and righteousness, this is where righteousness is. That connection to my own spirit, the maintenance of my own spirit. Self-care is about recuperation. One of the things that I have had to learn is you cannot continue to move forward, constantly maintain, constantly work without taking time to recuperate. I've seen a number of memes on Facebook now where it says you need to give your body rest or your body won't give you the option. Right? Essentially, on a physical level and mental, emotional, spiritual, that can be burnout. And I know myself, I have definitely reached burnout on 2 occasions in my 28, almost 29 years as a counselor, possibly a third. And that's what I was doing. I was working constantly. I was always, in those times, I considered myself proactive in making sure I was self-sufficient, living up to my responsibilities, being a helpful support to my family and community. So early on, the idea of saying no was just something that I was not consciously employing in my life. So someone asked that me to do something. There wasn't a reaction to think about, can I do this, or am I able to do this, or is this going to be damaging to me in any way? It was, how do I fit it in? So, working a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday, while working another job on the weekends, while also doing evening work, while at the same time, being in school, maintaining family relationships, taking care of just the simple responsibilities of having a home, doing my laundry, getting groceries. I remember at one point where I was learning the concept of self-care and getting a better understanding of being able to say no. So being able to say no is a huge part of self-care, because quite a number of people that I was interacting with were accustomed to me always saying yes, always making myself available, always making sacrifices. So I remember once I was working, I think that where I was working, the day started at 8:30, we finished at 4. But I was also a group facilitator, and so I had a group that day. So group starts at 7, finishes at 9, clean up until 10. So typically what should have happened was, instead of coming in at 8:30 a.m., I would come in at 2 p.m., do my 8 hours, work till 10. That's my day. But there were a couple of events happening and things like that, and I was told, well, we need you to come in at 8:30. So started at 8:30, worked till 10, and that started to become a regular thing. And I still had people asking me to, can you come speak at this group, or can you facilitate this many groups in our series, and things like that. And a buddy of mine who was looking for a facilitator came to me and asked me, I'm running this group at such and such an agency, and on this particular night, this is the subject, and I think you would be a good speaker for that night. He said, "Are you available?" I said, "Well," and I just explained to him that, well, start at 8:30 in the morning. I'm going to be working till 10. Um, so that's pretty much my whole day. What he heard was, "So you're available at 10?" Um, and that's what he said. "So you're available at 10?" So in the moment, initially, it was just, I didn't say it, but I thought, yes, I'm available at 10. But before that came out of my mouth, I remembered, wait a minute, that's a 13 and a half hour, 14 and a half hour shift, 13 and a half hour shift. And I still haven't taken care of myself. Now, now the concept of self-care, I knew it as a concept, like, kind of like how I described culture. It's a thing that sits on the shelf. I pull it out once in a while, put it back. That was where I had self-care. So when I was thinking, well, I haven't taken care of myself, it wasn't myself I was thinking. I was thinking laundry, things around the house that I still need to take care of that and work with. And I was thinking, well, I gotta work 8:30 tomorrow morning. If I do this group, I'm not gonna get to bed till late. So not only am I gonna be tired from not getting enough sleep, I'm gonna be tired because I just did a 13 and a half hour shift. So before I had my knee-jerk reaction to say yes. Had to take a moment and then said, I'm not available at 10. It's just not going to happen. And he was adamant, well, but I really need you to do this. And prior to that, now that would have been another trigger for me to change my mind and say, okay, since you need it, I'll be there. And in the moment, just without giving it much thought, because what I wanted to do was impress upon him the fact that I really don't have time. And this is actually a reality in that moment. One of the things that was on the back of my mind was the fact that because I had been so busy for a couple of weeks prior to that, I hadn't been able to do laundry to the point where I think at that time, it might have been 2 days not having underwear and re-wearing socks because I simply did not have the time to do my laundry because I was doing all these things because other people requested and I wasn't saying no. So I just said to my friend, try to understand. Because I'm spending so much time working for other people, I'm not looking after the things I need to, that I am 2 days commando. And I'm still not going to be able to do my laundry tonight. And you still want to take my time. Can you please be considerate of the fact that I can only go so far? And I felt bad for saying that. Self-care means not necessarily understanding your limitations, because a lot of times we feel like Superman. It's understanding that you need to put limitations. You need to put boundaries up so that you can do what you need to do for yourself. So that you can continue to do other things. It was about that time, my conversation with my father, and I actually had told him that story. And what my father, I don't exactly know how he heard it, but this was the response he had. Because I think he was kind of focused on the fact that I was working so much. It was extra income, so I wasn't wanting for paying bills and struggling for things like that. But I had no time for like a social life or family or anything like that, or even just doing the things that I want to do that I would enjoy, or even just doing nothing. So my father, very simply, said to me, remember this, because I had to learn it. You say, and yours sounds like you need to learn it. You have a job so that you can have a life. Your job should not become your life. And that kind of shut me up. Because him saying that, I had to acknowledge to myself that the reason why I didn't have all this time wasn't that people were asking me. It was because I wasn't saying no. I was taking to an extreme some of the beliefs I had, and still do. But I wasn't balancing those beliefs with a sense of self-care, a sense of self-preservation, a sense of honoring myself and who I am. Because, as I talked about, as we grow and we develop, we find out things that we like and we dislike and things like that. I had a lot of varied interests, but I hadn't participated or pursued a lot of those interests because of work. And I was also anticipating, well, I might be working, so I don't think I can do that. And in those moments, my shield, I guess, was that, well, I'm being altruistic. I'm making these sacrifices for the good of the community, for the good of my coworkers, for the good of my friends, for the good of my family. And the reality was, I was overextending myself and I wasn't looking after myself. And not in every case, but in quite a number of cases, you learn that when you reach that point where you can't do anymore, they'll find somebody else. Maybe they'll care that you need the rest, or maybe that's pushing you aside. But what it comes down to is, you do not have to be so self. Can't remember the word I was going to use. You don't have to be so self-sacrificing. You don't have to be so there for everybody else. It's great if you can be, but you have to hold things in reserve. So that's why rest is such an important thing. Get your rest. Other things that you have to be aware of. As in that story, I talked about all the things that I had set aside, my interests. Every one of you watching this video, you have interests outside of income or employment. I mean, there's a thing out there that people have been saying for a long time, and it's come to the forefront recently. When people talk about saying living your best life. In some cases, I from what I'm seeing, that statement is actually a bit of a red flag for me, because it's gone to another extreme. Because where that was born out of was this idea of exploring yourself, expressing yourself, pursuing the things that you want. But the extreme of that is inappropriate selfishness. Living your best life, putting other people aside, not looking after responsibilities. I've seen a lot of people take it to that extreme. So when there's such a thing as inappropriate selfishness, the opposite of that, the converse, the other side of that coin, is appropriate selfishness. That's what a lot of what self-care is. It's appropriate selfishness. Just for the sake of self-preservation, for the sake of your sanity, for the sake of continuing to be whatever it is that you've built yourself to be. You need to take time to do and indulge in these things that you care about, that you like, whatever that is. What's a good example of that? Well, I will use myself as the example. So early on in my life, comic books. Really enjoyed comic books. Among other things, there's tons of things that I enjoyed, but sacrificed indulging in those things because A lot of the things that, like, it's expensive. Comic books in particular can be expensive. Don't have time for it because you're always working. And then maybe taking other people's opinions of the things that I cared about a little too strongly. It's fine to have an opinion. Maybe there's a new perspective on that. But at the end of the day, it's me who's living the life. It's me who is attracted to these things. And it's me who has to decide whether that's okay or not. So the past few years, well, I'd say it's a few years since 2012, because I tend to be very organized, so I make lists and things like that. So I can definitely tell you it's been since 2012. I've become an avid comic book collector. Not many people know that. It's because I don't advertise it. That's not important that I don't advertise it. What is important is that I don't do it for anybody else except me, because I enjoy it. Self-care is about finding joy. Self-care is about taking time to enjoy your life. That is such an important thing. Social time, alone time, doing the things that you find fun, doing the things that stimulate you, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in balance, right? Discovering, taking time to look at these things, and discover what it is that you actually are attracted to. An exercise that I did many years ago, because in using counseling, and counseling is also self-care. Getting some kind of counseling and therapeutic support, that is about taking care of yourself. A lot of people will frame that as addressing my problems. Okay, but really it's self-care, because it's getting yourself to a better place. So I had reached a point in my life where I had come to the realization that quite a number of things that I had been doing in my life wasn't necessarily because I wanted to do them. It was because other people were telling me I should do it. People were pushing me to do it. And essentially what I was doing was I was doing it to get them off my back. So once I came to that realization, I had to take some time to really think about, well, what do I want to do with that? And came down to, well, I have to find out all these things that I have in my life, which ones are the ones that I want, and which ones were the ones that somebody else wanted. So, processing all of that, ganikuyo, good mind, processing that. Every little thing that came up, this is about a year's process. I had to really evaluate, well, am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing this because I'm wanting to satisfy or please somebody else? And if the answer was it's because I want to, I continue it. But if the answer was, well, it's because somebody else told me that I should, or that it's because it's going to benefit them, might not necessarily benefit me, then I had to have a conversation with myself, ask myself those questions. Well, if it's not helping me, is it hurting me? And if it's hurting me, is it something I really want to continue? So there was a lot of things in my life that I changed at that time, simply because I really discovered I really didn't care for it. I really didn't like it. It was because it was for somebody else's benefit. And as much as that can be a great thing to sacrifice for the benefit of somebody else, you also have to be able to say no if it's taking too much out of you, if it's taking too much of your energy, taking too much out of your time, if it's costing you more than you're able to pay. Right? After I finished that process, I had to go on a bit of a discovery to figure out what is it in life that I really do want. because part of that was I remembering that there were so many opportunities that I simply did not engage in favor of responsibility. So I went on about 6 months of not saying no. Now, if that appeals to any of you, before you start diving into something like that, there's some caveats there. Not saying no wasn't saying yes, right? Or someone would ask, would you like to participate in this? If the answer wasn't yes or no, it was, well, tell me more about that. What does that involve? So spending time to explore it. And that would mean quite a few different things. Whoever's asking me, there's a relationship building there because you're taking interest in it. Learning a little bit about who they are because this is something they're interested in too. But then you find out as you listen to things, is this something that could interest me? And a lot of times what would end up happening is I would say, okay, let's try it. Not a wholehearted yes, but let's try it. And in the trying, getting the experience of it. Something that I discovered, hey, this is good. I think I want to continue this. I want to explore this more. But then there were other things that, well, yeah, that didn't really do anything for me. So I don't. Thanks for the experience, but I think that's as far as I'm going to take it. Open up the world instead of being so self-sacrificing, putting my needs aside for the benefit of other people continually. I started to learn when to be self-sacrificing and when to be appropriately selfish. These are things that for you really do need to explore, to look after yourself, to honor yourself. Essentially, that is the basics of self-care. It's resting, it's boundaries, but it's also self-discovery. Connecting to who you are, honoring that for yourself, regardless of if anybody else honors it. Figuring out what it is that you like and don't like, regardless of whether anybody else feels the same. So if you'll notice, or if you took note, in this description, I wasn't necessarily. I mean, there was a couple of pieces there where I was being very technical about this is what I did, or this is what you could do, but largely it was more a conceptual thing. This understanding, getting this framework of how to understand the concept of self-care. Not saying it's this, it's that. If you're doing this, don't do that. It's more that idea of what is self-care for you. Some people that's going to the gym. For some people that's sitting quietly with a book. For some people that's meditation. For some it's a regularly implemented workout routine. I know I have friends who, now mind you, this is because financially they can afford it, but yearly they go on a trip somewhere warm, somewhere hot, and they really did notice it when they weren't able to travel because of COVID-19. It definitely was a part of their self-care, and some people look at it, well, that's expensive, it's a waste of money. But the benefits they got from that was well worth the expense. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you should do. Your thing might be different. Some people go camping, or some people just have a stay vacation, a staycation, stay at home. But in that sense, it's a break from the regular things that you do. It's a refresher. So, again, those are themes. It's not telling you this is what you should do. Because if we went into those kind of technicalities, we could go for hours on that. More what I want you to understand is the theme of self-care. Looking after oneself, and exploring oneself. So, just to get an understanding of how uh, on the surface, self-care might not look what a lot of people will conceptualize self-care to be. If you've noticed, particularly in this video, looking at me, my hair isn't brushed like it normally is. I got these little wisps sitting here. I'm a little greasy. I'm a little sweaty. You haven't seen my arms, but I got dirt on and things like that. In my regular job, we're getting back to the office, but my office is actually not sitting in a building for the most part. I mean, we do have that, but this past 2 weeks we've been back to not working from home. We've been in cornfields. We've been in the bush. We've been on the escarpment. We've been picking and processing corn. We've been picking medicines and drying medicines and running, like being out on the land. And for me, that was a reminder, because working in an office, there's certain parameters that you have to always be aware of. You have a dress code. So that means a particular style of clothing, a particular quality of clothing. And one of the things that you don't want to do is get that clothing dirty, get that clothing sweaty, damage to it. So I had developed an aversion to sweating, because the majority of my time was spent in an office, in deference to the clothes I was wearing, making sure they were looked after and cared for, because, it's about the presentation. And I know myself in particular, I don't really care about the presentation. The only reason I was following the dress code is because it was an obligation to be employed that I follow the dress code. Because I work with clients, having been a client myself at one point, someone who dresses like that might be intimidating, and it actually can be an obstacle to connecting to a client. So I've never been an advocate of the dress code, but I followed it simply because it was part of the employment. So doing this work, being out on the land and doing that kind of work, you don't wear that kind of clothing, because you can damage the clothes. And one of the first thoughts I had when I was told we're getting into that now was, oh man, I'm gonna sweat. And this past week, what I realized, because I've been sweating, it's not the sweating that I have the aversion to. It's sweating in those clothes, because the work to maintain it and all that stuff. I actually enjoy sweating, because sweating is a result of work. I used to love physical work. I used to love working out. For me, I wouldn't keep time on workout equipment. So there were times when I was young that I would do, an hour and a half, 2 hours on a rowing machine. Because in my mind, I wasn't working out. I was meeting challenges. I've never been great at doing things like weightlifting. Because part of my thing is, my work was always associated with a finished product. Cutting grass, baling hay, those kinds of things. So, and in my teenage years, we used to do a lot of stuff like that. So sweat was just part of your day, and I enjoyed it, because I was physically working. I was relatively healthy because of it. And then at the end of the day, I could say, look, I cut the grass. The grass is cut. Look how high we pile those bales. Look at this, the thing that we accomplished through this physical work. I enjoyed all of that. And this past week, despite the fact that I'm very out of shape, and literally because of COVID, I have not been doing anything for 5 months. And my age and things like that, it's my body's aching. my hair is a mess and all that stuff, I feel really good because I was able to engage not just in the physical work, but the work that we were doing. You know, you know, connecting to our medicines and things like that, traditional medicines, traditional ways of processing that medicine, traditional ways of processing corn, and then the conversations that we had around that, because a number of my coworkers don't have a lot of the knowledge, and then some of the people that we consult with have a lot of knowledge, and I'm somewhere in the middle of that mix. So partly being a teacher, but definitely being a learner in that environment, in the bush, in the cornfield, around a fire, producing something, and something that is culturally connected. I mean, that was just going back to when that thing about if you do what you love, or if your work is what you love, then you will never actually work a day in your life. Again, that's a statement that I tend to have some red flags around, but I definitely saw the wisdom in that in these past few days, because even though it's my job and I had to be there at a particular time, we're done at a certain time, and it's part of the work that I'm being paid to do, it didn't feel like work. It just felt like this is the things that we need to be doing, the things that I want to do in my old age. It just felt good, even though I'm sore, even though I scraped up my leg pretty good, walking fairly stiff, all that stuff. I feel really good. I feel really happy. I feel fulfilled. And also understanding that it's not done. I'm going to go back to work tomorrow and the next day and get to do this again. These were things that, because of living up to responsibilities and sacrificing for other people, I was not able to do. Hadn't planted a garden in so many years. I have my own little garden now, and I got to do work in a garden, a big garden, a job that lets me do those things. In the end, though, considering self-care, that's what you're looking for. That sense of joy, that sense of connection, that sense of fulfillment. So consider that when we talk about self-care. Consider not necessarily is something self-care. Does it fit a particular definition of self-care? Think about the things in your life that you gravitate towards, that you want to do, the things that are there for you. Do they make you feel good? Do they help improve? Do they fulfill you? Generally speaking, if that's what they do, they're part of self-care. They're part of that that sense of looking after yourself. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to leave it there. I got one more thing I want to say about that. My suggestion for all of you who are watching this and are contemplating making self-care a conscious thing in your life, one thing that I would really ask that you not do is allow anybody else to tell you that your concept of self-care and the things that you want to do for self-care are irrelevant, are unimportant, are silly, anything like that. If that's their perception of it, then that's their perception of it. Don't let it change yours. If it makes you feel good, you do that. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, right? Keep that in mind too. So with that, Donito. And if you survived 8 videos of this, Nyawa for coming through this, for listening. Yeah.